Welcome to Political Perspectives and the Washington Examiner. I'm Hugo Gurdon, Editor-in-Chief. If you are joining us on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel. I'm joined, as I usually am, by Byron York, Chief Political Correspondent. And Byron, I want to talk to you about media coverage of the administration. And to start with this week's announcement of the Pulitzer Prizes, there was an iconic photograph from last year of or several photographs which really attracted attention from Butler, Pennsylvania, where Trump was shot. And the picture that was most used in the news was that iconic one of him surrounded and shielded by his security service, by his security team, but he's emerging from that circle with his fist raised, blood on his face, a flag flying behind him. News desks and photo desks obviously realized that that was the most iconic and most dramatic breaking news photograph. But the picture that was actually chosen was a rather extraordinary photograph, but it was a mostly ordinary photograph of Trump wincing. But the photographer had by chance captured the speeding bullet just behind Trump's head. Now, there is concern. I think that there was concern at the time that the anti-Trump media felt that this photograph, in constantly being used, made Trump look too good, and one suspects that some of this might have gone into the Pulitzer Prize decision as well. So, you wrote about this this week. Give us your take about this and how you think this is an important issue.
Well, the Pulitzer board doesn't explain why it chose A over B, at least in public. But there's no doubt that there has been politics behind this issue ever since the shooting, which is July 13th of last year. Because I don't know about you, but whenever the AP photos by Evan Vucci of Trump with his fist in the air, blood on his face, as you described, yelling "fight, fight, fight." When that picture came out, the composition, it was just a stunning photo, and it was one of these things that really does remind you of the value of still photography, because we had been seeing the video of what took place, but this photo just took your breath away.
Right.
And there really were a couple of other pictures from that day, since the events were so dramatic, and the photos were pretty dramatic. And one was the one that you described by the New York Times' Doug Mills, which is a completely unremarkable picture, except for this slight tracing of a bullet that you could see in the picture. Like he actually caught a speeding bullet. The odds of that are just impossible to calculate. And that was by Doug Mills of the New York Times. And his other photos, Mills's other photos from the day were good, but nothing absolutely extraordinary like the Vucci picture. And the last one, which is a really interesting picture, and it showed a lot of, I thought, initiative on the part of the photographer, was taken at the stage level, and it was by a woman named Anna Moneymaker of Getty. And the Secret Service agents were on their knees around Trump, and the one guy's knees were separated, and she looked and she saw through kind of a triangle created by the stage and his knees, Trump's face is very close to the ground as he was being held down by agents, blood on the face, obvious concern, bewilderment. It was a really very evocative and interesting photo. And there was talk at the time that those were the big three images that had come out of this.
Right.
But I think a lot of people thought, well, the choice for Pulitzer Prize is pretty clear. The Evan Vucci AP photo is going to win. And then, as you hinted, it became a real favorite of Trump supporters and the Trump campaign, because
Right.
it really did show a certain amount of defiance and physical courage by Trump, who stood up and stuck his head out when there could have been more shots to be fired. And it became a kind of a heroic photograph. Now, I just think on a journalistic scale and an aesthetic scale, it's just up there with a lot of really great historic photographs that's been compared to the photograph of the Marines raising the flag at Iwo Jima in 1945. Not sure if it's that big, but it's really a historic photograph. And I think you have to ask yourself, the Pulitzer choice was pretty easy. They skipped over the AP Evan Vucci and gave it to Doug Mills, ignored the other photographer too, the Anna Moneymaker.
Right.
And it's hard not to think that politics were not involved in the story.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think politics were involved, but there's another element which I think is interesting, and the Pulitzers have a kind of history of this.
Yeah.
The New York Times has the power in the awarding of the Pulitzers to override the judges, and I have actually spoken to a judge, not from this year but from past year, who described the process by which, after a story was once discarded, the New York Times reached down and overrode the decision. So I don't know that that was what happened this time. I have no evidence to suggest it, other than the fact that as you observe, the much the strongest picture, much the strongest news picture was ignored, and one suspects that the award was made for reasons other than the quality of the picture. And this is a little bit like sort of DEI hiring or affirmative action hiring. It kind of puts an asterisk, which is against what was a fine photograph by the person that won, but it kind of it devalues the prize itself, don't you think?
It does. And we should point out that these are photographers at the very height of their profession. Doug Mills has won 2 Pulitzer Prizes before, so this is his third. And Evan Vucci won a Pulitzer Prize in 2021, so this would have been his second. I don't know about Anna Moneymaker, whether she's won one or
Right.
not, but I think if you insisted that the other photographs were just as good as the Vucci photo, which they weren't, but if you did, the judges could have come up with a more equitable solution. They could have split it amongst the three and said these 3 photographers produced extraordinary, memorable images of this dramatic day. Or you could split it between Vucci and Mills or Vucci and Moneymaker. I mean, there were ways to do it that would have been fairer and not given the single Pulitzer Prize to Evan Vucci, which I think was well deserved, but the judges obviously did not.
Right. Well, this goes to the wider issue of media coverage of President Trump. And one of the things that has been observed since he arrived on the scene 10 years ago or so, on the political scene, that is, which is that the media has distorted itself to treat as important things which are less important, and to allow their, as it were, their political analysis, their political bias, to overcome their duty and their service to the public of presenting the facts. And I was struck by that very thought a few days before the Pulitzers were awarded, in looking at the Meet the Press interview that the president did, because I was struck by the way that the questions were asked and the news of what the president said were reported. And it was less about actually informing viewers about what the Trump administration is actually doing, what it's trying to do, where it's going, and more about asking questions in such a way as to produce a headline and a hit against Trump. And the thing that I'm thinking of in particular was this exchange between himself and the interviewer.
And I have great respect for the Supreme Court, and I would expect that the Attorney General will be doing the right thing.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says
I don't know. It seems it might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials.
The discussion between NBC and the president was clearly saying, he actually did say, I'll follow what the Supreme Court says. So the Supreme Court is the ultimate decider of what the Constitution means. So he was not, but he was saying, I'm not an expert in the law. I'm going to take my advice from the lawyers. But because in the back and forth, the interviewer said, don't you think you should be following the Constitution? And he just said, I don't know, I'm not an expert, I have to follow the lawyers. That was seized on as Trump doesn't know that he should follow the Constitution. This became the stuff of punditry all over television. And it's, in effect, a non-story, because he wasn't really saying, I'm going to ignore the Constitution.
Yeah.
He was saying, I'm going to follow what the lawyers tell me and what the Supreme Court says, and I don't know whether all of these people should have their day in court.
And by the way, there are people who disagree about what the Constitution says, and they go to the Supreme Court to settle it.
Exactly.
And Trump is saying, I'm going to do what the Supreme Court says. This is something that's happened ever since Trump emerged as a presidential contender, which is one, a lot of journalism about him is prospective. It is the premise of story A or story B is that if Trump does this, this will happen. Right. If Trump imposes this tariff, the world will explode. And if Trump imposes that tariff, we'll all melt down. So there's a lot that goes on in every area of political activity. I remember writing a story in the first Trump campaign, the 2016 campaign. A reporter came up with an idea about a database of all Muslims in the United States. And there was no such database, and there isn't such database, and Trump had not proposed any database. So the reporter actually proposes it. So are you gonna create a Muslim database if you're elected? And Trump goes, right. Well, I don't know. Well, the story is Trump refuses to rule out Muslim database.
Exactly.
And, that's completely press-created controversy. Trump doesn't always mind that because he thinks it makes the press look stupid and it keeps him in the news.
Right.
But this has been going on for quite a while with this president.
Yeah. Well, there was another example of something similar, and this is like an absurd story, and it relates to the AI image, admittedly circulated by the White House, but of President Trump as the new Pope, in the Pope's robes, etc., etc. And this all emerged from a quick, off-the-cuff joke, so far as I can tell, that Trump made on his way to the helicopter, Marine One.
I'd like to be Pope. That would be my number one choice. No, I don't know. I have no preference. I must say we have a cardinal that happens to be out of a place called New York who's very good.
There's the gaggle of reporters. They shout questions. I think one of them asked about the Pope, and he just said something like, oh, I think I'd be a great Pope. And then he said, no, actually, I don't have a favorite. And then people take that up, and they treat it as something other than a joke. And so I think that what Trump did there, or what the White House did, was they trolled all of these people who get very worked up about things. They produced this photograph, and then the Washington Post went and talked to various Catholics, Cardinal Dolan and various others, who said they didn't like it. They didn't like this. Well, they wouldn't. But then there's a story about senior Catholics repelled by Trump's, AI photograph. This is all or nothing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And actually, I looked at that and I thought, boy, AI is really good. Getting better every day. We should probably be scared, but it was all a joke. And as a matter of fact, when a Twitter troll put it to Vice President Vance, he said, it's a joke. I'm not upset about it. Vice President Vance being a practicing Catholic. And he said, it's just not a big deal. And I agree with you entirely that it's just not a big deal. And clearly the press going around searching for people who might be offended by it. So then they could do a story that people are offended by it. Let's just call it an enterprise story.
And finally, Byron, to take up that idea of an enterprise story, in other words, one which the press wants to do and kind of basically does 9/10 of the running. Obviously, there is the counterpoint that both with that kind of trolling and with somewhat too little care about the way he answers questions in a precise way, as with the Meet the Press thing, Trump does to some extent have himself to blame for the kind of coverage. the press is baited. They absolutely love to take this stuff and try and present him negatively, but he gives them the bait to do that, doesn't he?
He does, and a lot of times it's intentional because Trump likes it when the press goes nuts about something small, and his supporters, Trump supporters, then push back on it. And the story is about the press as opposed to whatever he is doing. But you're right. Trump communicates in a different way, just verbally communicates in a different way from a lot of politicians. It's something that, again, I wrote about back in the 2016 campaign because his campaign events were just so different from any I had ever attended by any other candidate, Republican or Democrat. And his supporters were getting the message. They actually created an emotional bond with him, but a lot of people in the press just never got it,
Right.
and they still don't, and they're never going to either.
Right.
I think.
No, they never will, and he's not going to change. So we'll get more of this. It's constantly fascinating, but it really does go to what the press thinks its job is. Is it to enlighten readers or viewers and tell them actually what's going on, or is it simply to kind of engage in a sort of strange and superficial sparring with the president, on which the president, perhaps if he were intent on being more dignified, would refuse to engage them. But that's where we'll leave it, Byron. Thanks very much for joining us, and I also want to thank all our viewers for coming in. Remember to like and subscribe if you're with us on YouTube, and we'll see you again next time.